welcome to Beyond Motion podcast, where we are looking at the innovations and trends in biomechanics. I'm here with my co-host, Lindsey Hennington.
Hello.
And we are super excited to have our good friend, Ethan Stewart, in the building today.
Hello.
Very neat to have our guest in person. So thank you for making the trip to the office.
Happy to be here.
It's a cool setup, something that we're trying on the fly, but I think it's going to work pretty well. So, thanks for making the trip, and we're excited to chat with you today about some stuff, particularly biomechanics in baseball.
Mm-hmm.
Seeing how you got there and some of the different trends and exciting things that are going on in that sport.
Yeah. Yep.
So I think to get started, how did you get here? What sparked your interest in biomechanics, and then how did that go into baseball, or was it the other way around?
Yeah, I think.
Actually, before we get into that, Can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah.
Who are you?
Yeah. So my name's Ethan Stewart. I'm the lead sports scientist and biomechanist for the Athletics.
Yes.
My journey's been interesting. I always want to do physical therapy. I thought that was like the path for me. I went to undergrad as a biology major, and I hated it. It was not for me. So I switched to kinesiology, which made a lot more sense in the long run if you're doing physical therapy to be a kinesiology major. I was pre-physical therapy for 3.5 years, did 200 plus shadow hours in PT clinics. I thought that was the route I was going to go. And I took a biomechanics class in my very last semester at UK, and I fell in love. Seeing the ability to attack injuries and work on performance before something happens to an athlete was really exciting for me to do more of that injury prevention stuff. So after 3.5 years of taking PT, doing all the shadow hours, I just didn't apply to any PT schools, and I applied to start the master's program at Kentucky under biomechanics.
So you decided you didn't want to fix people. You wanted to figure out how to not break them.
Yeah. So I wanted to be more on the front side. I wanted to help them to reduce their risk of injury instead of trying to fix them afterwards. And the beautiful part of biomechanics is you get the post, you get the rehab, you get the return to play. So we still work with all of that, but I get to do a lot more of the front end work to try to keep them healthy before things happen. So applied to my master's program. Basketball was always my favorite sport. I'm from the state of Kentucky. So basketball is the biggest sport in our state. And when I was trying to figure out what I wanted to study in biomechanics for my master's thesis, I just found a huge gap in the literature for hitting biomechanics. Everybody was looking at pitching this, pitching that, and I wanted to start something new. Biomechanics and basketball was interesting to me, but baseball made a lot more sense to my brain.
Sure.
So I started a hitting research project for master's thesis, looking at EMG, force plate, kinematics, during swinging, hitting off the tee for Division II, Division III players, and then the club team at UK, trying to figure out where the skill gaps were, what could happen, anything there. And I just really fell in love with that side of it. And I didn't really know what to do after a master's program. My thought was maybe still go to PT school after getting a master's degree.
Still in the back of your mind at that point.
Yeah, I was still thinking about it. It was still something that was interesting. But I applied to my PhD program. So I'm a PhD candidate at Mississippi State. That's an interesting point for me right now. But started my PhD there, and then I was lucky enough to get an internship with the Tampa Bay Rays. So it's a performance science intern for 2 summers with the Tampa Bay Rays, and I kind of fell in love with the pro sports side.
Sure.
I really like the research. I really like the writing side. But being more applied and working directly with the athletes, working directly with the coaches to figure out what we can do was where my passion really ignited. So I did 2 summers with the Tampa Bay Rays, loved my time there, and I got a full-time job offer from the Baltimore Orioles to come in and be their player performance facilitator. And I couldn't turn a position like that down. So I left my PhD, went and worked for the O's for 2 years, great 2 years, loved my time there. Decided that I was going to switch teams. So the Orioles and I parted ways. I got a job with the Cincinnati Reds as their applied biomechanist. Really loved my time there. I grew up a Cincinnati Reds fan. I'm not afraid to say that. If anyone knows myself or my wife, like we both grew up Reds fans, but very happy with where we're at.
Yeah.
And the opportunity came winter meetings 2 years ago that the A's were looking for someone to come and lead their new sports science and biomechanics department. They were interested. So we chatted. It was a right fit for me, and I made the transition over to the A's to come and start a brand new sports science and biomechanics department.
Very cool.
Yeah, super exciting. It's like I think it's interesting how you kind of went from this journey of wanting to sort of take the approach from a clinical standpoint and then falling in love with the performance side of things. And I mean, aside from the fact that we were talking about as far as like, try to reduce injury and things like that, but it's now how do you make these elite athletes more elite? And something that we talk about often on the podcast is how biomechanics sort of allows those measurements, those little tweaks to actually have an effect at those levels. In all reality, it's like this the baseline, the ground for skill is so high that in order to get to any other ceiling, you need to make those minor adjustments. So it's cool because you probably got to bring that scientific background into those positions each time.
Yeah, and I think that's the coolest part about really all of my positions so far that I've had is I'm working with elite level athletes on a daily basis. So we're not trying to overhaul most of these guys. We're trying to make the minute adjustments that are going to get them to that next level. Like I tell my guys, and I've been open with this anywhere I've talked, is my success is measured by your success. Sure. It doesn't matter how much I do in the background, doesn't matter what I'm doing. Your success in the field, you staying healthy is what says that I'm successful. Like when you get a max contract, that means that we did something right. And if I helped you, then that's great. So for me, all the success in my job is based on the success on the field and my athletes staying healthy, performing at their best. And it's not like how many evals did we do this year? How many times did we run our technology? It's how do we keep them healthy and how do we keep them performing at their best? Which I think is the coolest.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, that's all that really matters, right?
Yeah.
When it comes to sports, is, what's happening on the field. Did you win or lose games? I guess you can break that down into the individual athlete and their personal success and statistics and things like that. But yeah, I mean, I think that's what's so interesting to me, even about baseball in general, is it feels like, and you can probably comment on this further, but over the last, I don't know, decade or so, there's been this huge influx or interest rather in sort of putting scientists into the organizations. Coming from your standpoint and probably having connections and relationships with these scientists in these organizations, like how have you seen that evolve?
Yeah, I think it's been really, really cool to see. So there were a few teams that were in the front end of hiring sports science biomechanists. One of the first was the Tampa Bay Rays, which is why they have such a built out department. Their department is ginormous.
Really?
But when I was with the Orioles, I was the first ever hire for sports science biomechanics. Coming to the A's, I was the first ever hire for sports science biomechanics.
So you bring a wealth of knowledge kind of building the department too, to some degree?
I think I've been lucky that I've had a lot of experience. So I wouldn't say that like I'm coming in to just say, hey, this is how we're going to do things.
Sure.
I think it comes more from the experience and the backgrounds of working with the coaches, working with the staff, working with the front offices to know how things can work.
Yeah, you're familiar working in that kind of environment where you're kind of a one-man band trying to be this liaison between like, how do I communicate this information I'm seeing that we're collecting?
And I think what you're seeing is a lot of teams are starting with that one person to start to build those relationships, and then you're seeing departments grow.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really cool side of this. And baseball in general, like there's so much research that's happened in lab settings, that's happened with colleges everywhere, independent places, that it just makes sense for these teams to get into this aspect where they can start to do things on the inside. And I think that's where teams have gone, is they've seen that when they bring biomechanists, sports scientists in, we're getting a lot more out of it now than they would have, say, 10 years ago, because we have so much more of a wealth of knowledge from all the research that's happened. We know how things can work. We're getting stuff in game now. So there's so much more data coming in that you need someone that understands it to break it down, to get it to a actionable level. Because for better or worse, as biomechanists, we're very technical.
Sure.
And there's a lot of words that don't make sense to a pitching coach in big leagues or a front office member who has been on the baseball operations side but never seen this data. So they need someone that can come in and break it down and help them understand it more.
Yeah. Baseball is also kind of a unique sport in that a lot of these actions that the players are performing during the game are something that they can practice and they can repeat. And that's not the case with a lot of other pro sports out there. It's more so reacting to what other players are doing and at what times. So it's really unique that you can take that necessary part of research, able to like build a test protocol and repeat that test protocol. You're like, hey, we already have that. We want this guy to pitch the same way every time, maybe, or hit the ball every single time.
Yeah, I think the coolest thing and probably the lowest hanging fruit, the reason there's so much research in baseball pitching biomechanics is that you're trying to repeat the exact same thing every time.
Sure.
The reason hitting is so much more difficult is it's a reactionary part of baseball. You're reacting to what the pitcher is doing every time. They're trying to fool you with every pitch. They're trying to locate it in a spot that they know you can't hit it. So I think we're like in a really cool crossroads for baseball now where pitching's taken the front row for 25, 30 years in the research and biomechanics. And now people are diving into the hitting and seeing that side and figuring out what we can get out of understanding how guys make adjustments to their biomechanics at the plate based on what the pitcher's trying to do to them. So I think we're getting to a much better spot. But I do think you're right. I think that's why baseball was probably the second sport to really take off in this sports science side, with soccer being the first. If you look at a lot of pro clubs overseas, they've had sports scientists looking at GPS data, injury prevention stuff for years. And baseball is like, all right, let's dive into it. Let's figure out what we can do. Football has their sports scientists now where they're having guys where their GPS units, they're looking at all of their testing to understand where their performance is. Basketball starting to dive into it where they're hiring biomechanists out of baseball clubs to come run their new departments in basketball. So
That's interesting.
you're seeing a really, really cool shift of biomechanics really taking off in all the pro sports aspects.
Yeah. Yeah, it's something Lindsey and I were talking about the other day was sort of in preparation for this was how, baseball in general is very statistically driven. The strategies that you're finding, obviously pioneered by your guys over there at the Athletics in history. But it's interesting now to see then, okay, those are kind of like results-based statistics, right? You're looking at ERA, you're looking at batting percentage, you're looking at all the different things that are happening in the game. How does then the biomechanics side of things, that data, how does that start to have an effect on that same sort of statistical strategy that you've seen deployed? And I guess part of that, they've already got probably a lot of talented people in organization that you can just say, hey, here's like this set of information. Like, can you start to make sense of it? Do you have that crossover with those people all the time?
Yeah, I think the coolest thing that I've seen among my stops is the integration of this data into what we're doing. So it's not just, hey, let's look at his mechanics and say, like, how can we make him the normative version of a baseball pitcher? It's like, what's unique to him? What's unique to how he throws? So understanding when he's doing certain things, saying, all right, when he does that, what's different in the biomechanics? So I think the coolest part is working with the analyst and working on that side and saying, hey, based on our numbers, based on what we're seeing expected, when is it really good? When is it subpar? And what are the differences that we can see mechanically that's going to help them be really good 90% of the time?
Right.
So I think the crossroads has been really cool to see in terms of this isn't just the biomechanics, let's break down mechanics and tell them what we see. It's, all right, we know the biomechanics, we know when they're good, we know when they're bad based on the analytics. How can we tie all those together to make the best version of that player?
Right. And it sounds like it is a very individual approach to each player because of that. Every player has, maybe they have their one thing, the biomechanical way they throw a ball, swing a bat that makes them perform really well. And it just works for them. There's no cookie cutter, like this is what the best pitcher looks like.
Yeah, I think that's probably it's probably the thing that takes me the most time and takes us around the league the most time.
Sure.
But everything we do, we try to do it individualized. We're not trying to make everyone this cookie cutter approach to be like, oh, we know based on the research that this is the area that you need to be and you have to be in this area. Hey, we can nudge people to those areas because we know it's better for injury prevention, but based on their performance, what's their outlier? What's that metric that makes them the best? So it's not trying to make everyone this same approach. It's individualizing those feedbacks and individualizing conversations to understand what makes them good, and then making sure that as we make adjustments to get them to a good spot, that we're not losing that huge piece of who they are as a person and who they are as a player.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's important too, because of, the baseball purists, right? Like they may not be so fond of the strategies that analytics are coming to the table with, right? You got a guy that's on a no hitter and he's hit his pitch count, and analytics are like, hey, get this guy out. And he's like, what do you mean? Like, I'm feeling great, kind of a thing. So I think from your standpoint, sort of allowing the athlete to still sort of bring their own level of creativity from what their body is able to do just naturally, and obviously what they train to do too, and not overstep that, right? Like find that bridge between those two things and take that individualized approach is huge. Because the fact is there's just no way to create that cookie cutter person.
Right.
We're not robots. So
No.
And I think this is something that the baseball purists would like to hear. But I approach things a little differently than it's seen from the outside. So we're talking about biomechanics. I'm not going to a coach and saying, hey, we have to fix this. The coach and I, the player, we're having conversations all the time. So I understand what they're working on and what they're trying to do. So the biomechanics aren't making our decisions. The performance and what they're doing on the mound is affecting what we're doing decision-wise. So I tell my coaches, 99% of the time, you're exactly right with what's happening, maybe 99.9. What I can do is apply to a number to it. So now when we're trying to make an adjustment, we can measure how much has changed. And we're not just saying, hey, they've gotten better. It's, hey, we know they've gotten this X amount better. So I think that's something that's like been really cool to see, is the adoption strategies of this have really adjusted, where we're not going as the biomechanists and telling our coaches, hey, you have to do this. We're asking the coaches what they're seeing, and then we're measuring things to help them make their jobs easier. Our decisions are made by our coaching staff, and then we are helping them on the side.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're bringing discussion points to the table rather than leading with like, hey, this is what I'm noticing.
Yeah. And I think all of it's really dependent on the organization, and how they see it and how the coaches are seeing this information. But in my experience, coaches are really, really excited about this data, and it's about presenting it to them in a way that makes sense. So I'm not going to them and talking about, say, their shoulder horizontal abduction. Right? Like we're finding new languages. We're finding the crossroads where we can have a casual conversation so we understand each other about what's happening.
Yeah, you're a scientist talking to non-scientists.
Well, and they've developed their own language
Yeah, for sure.
decades and decades and decades. So you're kind of having to fit into the mold and be like, okay, yeah, like we're saying the same thing here, even though this may be fully technical language and this is, let's call it like in practice language or.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the biggest examples that's just super simple is we talk about max external rotation of the shoulder during the pitch, and that's layback.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right. If I tell a coach max external rotation, they're 99% of the time going to know what I'm talking about. But if I say layback, then there's just no need for any thought to be happening.
Yeah.
We're just on the same conversation. We're on the same train saying, oh, his layback is in a really good spot. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. The translation's there. That's interesting. Did you find that coming from the science world, was that like a slow grab for you, or did you have experience with that kind of already? Because you played baseball, didn't you?
So I played through high school, and then I played club at UK because I decided not to try to do anything in college.
But still, I mean, that's like, that's you're pursuing baseball past, Little League, right? Yeah. So where you start to actually get into the technicalities of, what your body's able to do. So did that help at all? Like with just being able to have those conversations?
I don't think it's necessary.
Sure.
I think the hardest thing is coming from the academic side and breaking into more of the practical side, like working on the applied side. Most of our time spent is writing papers that are super technical to go in journals.
Right.
They can only be read by their biomechanist. So finding that gap is usually the hardest thing. If you ask anyone who knew me during my master's, my PhD, or when I first got into baseball, they would say I'm probably the least professional person that you've seen in terms of academics, because I don't approach it the same way, right?
Okay.
Like I love understanding the technical side, but I never want to talk technical. So what I tell people anytime they're in academics and looking to get into applied is, if you can describe this and what you're doing to your parents or your grandparents or your brother or your sister, and have a conversation with them so they understand, then you're in a good spot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So finding that way to talk to someone random, your best friend, right?
Right.
You tell him what to do. Like my best friend works at a credit union, right? But I can have a conversation and explain what I do, and he understands.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where the important thing is, being able to relate. So for me, like the academics to applied side can be really easy as long as you figure out that gap to bridge language.
Yeah.
Have you felt like you've always kind of been more that way, where you're familiar with speaking to people that have different professions, and that's kind of what maybe felt more comfortable about the applied world? Or
Yeah, I think it helped.
Okay.
I do think playing the sports helped and understanding the sports on that side.
Yeah.
But I really think it's just about having a conversation to listen and understand what people know and how they see things, and then relating it back to them.
Sure.
So I think the majority of my job is like relationship building and listening, so that way when we have a conversation, I'm ready to understand how they look at it and I approach it to them, instead of creating this one approach how we talk to everyone in the organization the same way. It's each of my coaches, each of my pitching coaches, each of my hitting coaches, I talk to them all differently based on how they view the mechanics of pitching or hitting. So
The interpersonal skills are very high.
yeah, it's very important to be on that side. And
Yeah.
I think there's different places for different skill sets. So my job is more on the applied side. I'm much more on the field, talking to the players and coaches. There's also biomechanists with teams that work in the labs, and they spend a lot more time doing stuff in a lab setting, collecting the data, collecting the force plate data, writing the reports. So there's areas in all of sports now for all the specific skill sets, whether it's really, really interpersonal skills where you want to be out there and applied and talking to people, or whether you're really passionate about just the biomechanics side and you want to collect the data and analyze it.
Right.
We're seeing the ability for all of these areas to really be in an organization.
Yeah. I mean, with that in mind, can you talk a little bit more about what your day-to-day looks like in terms of like who you're interacting with, what kinds of conversations you're having? You mentioned you're talking to people a lot of the time, but are you also involved with collecting any of this data, looking at it?
Yeah. So I'm in a really unique position. So because we're a new department, we're starting from the ground up. So we're boots on the ground. We collect the data, we analyze the data, we talk to the staff. I think that's a really cool part. So my day-to-day is really dependent on what's going on during spring training. It's really early mornings for a team meeting to go out and watch all the bullpens, watch batting practice, understand that. Collecting the data with our different technologies with the guys, so we get a baseline understanding of where they're at coming in, and then staying through the game, watching the game, seeing them perform, so I understand what's the next step. Once we get into season, so I'm in charge of the sports science biomechanics from top down, so from the big leagues to the Dominican Republic. Excuse me. So I oversee all of our data that's being collected in terms of how we're getting it in, making sure that we have the quality checks internally with our analytics and database team. And then what we do is then figure out the best way to report it and get it out. So I'm very lucky that I'm not the only person in our group now. So we've gotten to hire two more. So we're a growing department. But during the season, I'm at every home game with the big league team. So my day is getting in early, looking at the data we got from the game before, breaking it down, seeing what's there, sending out any reports to my athletic trainers, my strength staff, my coaches, my front office, and then players. Players come in all the time. I think the coolest part that I've seen transition in the game is players are really invested in this technology and in this data now. So they want it. They want to see it. When I first got in, there was a little bit of a pushback just because they were thinking that it was trying to be used against them. I think that's really changed. The younger generations coming up, they've used this technology. They see how it benefits them. And I think now these guys are really, really invested. So on a daily basis, I have at least one player come down, sit at the desk with me and try to break down what's going on, try to understand what happened, see what happened the night before.
Yeah, some of these guys are even getting equipment for their own personal use, right? Like totally outside of you guys. So
I think that's the coolest part, is like my day-to-day is very variable based on what's happened the day before, based on what's going on. But I will say, working in professional baseball, your hours are tough.
Yeah.
We're working 7 days a week during the season. A lot of teams right now already have camps going at their spring training complex, so they're at least 5 days a week starting January 3rd. And then you run through the end of the instructs, which is usually in October. So November, December, you get some time off. But the time commitment to be in pro sports is probably the hardest thing. And that's, for me, the reason that I can still do it is because every day is just a tad bit different than the day before.
Sure.
So there's
Yeah.
always something new. There's always something exciting going on. So the day to day, I think the coolest thing is like there's set things in our process that we have to do, but then the filler time is just something completely random a lot of days, which is the most fun because you get to experience new things. You get to look into new data sets. And that's where it's really cool.
Yeah, it gets to break it up. Do you find that as many athletes, I'm sure, like to dive into the data? Do you find that any of them are like, don't tell me, I don't want to know any of the numbers, like you're going to ruin it for me?
Yeah, I mean, you have to understand your athletes. Some athletes are very cerebral, like they think about everything, they overthink things. So you have to understand when you can give them information and when not to. I think the coolest thing is the guys who want it and understand it and want to use it will come. The guys who don't will, like, I have good relationships with everybody on our team, but you understand which players can use it, which players can't. So say we've been working on something with a player and he doesn't want to think about the adjustment he's making. He doesn't want to be told. It's like, we'll have that conversation and we'll watch it. And the pitching coach and I, or the hitting coach and I, will talk about it and we'll understand where they're at. And then we can bring them new drills. We can bring them new things that just feeds in, but they're not actively thinking like, oh, I have to get to this position because that's what I need.
Sure.
Yeah, you're kind of filtering it in a way, in something that's they'll respond to versus, yeah, here's your handout,
Right.
you're out of range, you're out of the range, let's get you back into the range kind of thing.
Yeah, that's what we talked about earlier. It's like the individualization process and understanding each person, your relationships. You handle each coach different. You also handle each player different.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably one of the most fun parts is getting to know these guys, getting to know where they're at, what they can do, what they can understand, and feeding them the information that they want and they need.
So obviously, like, that collaboration between your position, between the coaches, between the players is paramount. I mean, like, without it, if there's any breakdown in communication across any one of those lines, that no one's doing their job well, in a lot of cases. Or, I mean, the player probably is still performing in most of the time. But in your experience, having been in these different organizations, how have you fostered that collaboration across the board?
Yeah, I think, again, I talk to anyone who's breaking into baseball for the first time, is like, spend the first year getting to know the organization, getting to build those relationships. Don't come in guns blazing, ready to tell people exactly what they have to do. Come in and understand what's going on. And I think that's been the coolest thing across all of my orgs, is I've had that ability to have that process actually occur where you build the relationships first, get the trust of all of those groups, and then can have those conversations. And I think you hit it. Like, communication is the biggest part of all of our days. It's understanding what the training staff's doing with that player to get them ready, understanding what the strength staff is doing in their programs, understanding what we're seeing with the pitching staff or the hitting staff are doing with them mechanically, understanding what we're seeing on the analytics side. So I think the really, really cool thing about all the orgs is all of those groups are so connected that there's just a constant flow of communication. We're not setting apart specific meeting times to go in and say, hey, we have to talk about X player today. We're all around each other so much and we're having these conversations that it's just a constant flow of information going from group to group. So when we're seeing stuff on the mound with our pitching coach and they come to us and they say, hey, what do you see biomechanically? And we see a deficiency or we see something, then the strength staff can work on it in the weight room. The athletic trainers can work on it in the training room. So we're attacking this from so many different angles. And I think that's probably been the coolest thing across all of my orgs, is seeing that connectivity between the groups to do what we can to the best of our ability to help each athlete achieve their dreams.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And especially working with, I mean, it's eight affiliates, right, per organization, more or less.
Yeah, right. Arizona,
Seven. And so, I mean, that's hundreds of guys that, you're having these interactions with, to some degree, at a regular basis. And, talking with like the guys who are in those lower leagues. I mean, I can imagine that those are the guys who are super psyched to just say, like, what's the missing link for me? Can you help me? Because I'm busting my butt in the weight room. I'm listening to everything coach is saying. I'm trying to do these things, but there's that one piece. And I think that's what we were even talking about at the beginning, is like, at this elite level, like sometimes that is the only thing that's going to really turn them over into that next echelon, is the ability to control those fine-tuned adjustments, and without measuring it. I mean, you literally have no clue.
Yeah, and I think that's probably was the coolest thing for me coming in is we come in with the ability to measure. So we take away a lot of subjectivity of adjustments and we can put an objective number to it. But what I saw coming into baseball and what I've seen is, like I said, like coaches 99.9% of the time are exactly right. The adjustments they're making are the right adjustments.
Right.
So it's crazy to me that, like, if I'm going to be honest, I'm not needed in an organization. The coaches are the experts. Right? The coaches know exactly what they're trying to do, how they're trying to get to that point. All I can do is help them basically measure it. So when I talk to these teams and during all of my interview processes, like, no, you don't need any of us. But what we can do is we can help you speed up that process.
Sure.
It's like you're hiring the experts to help those athletes already, but we're coming in to help you do the objective side. And that's probably the coolest thing is showing that side. Like, I'm not here to change anything you do.
Right.
I'm just here to help you along the way.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's providing that support. And what's the saying? What rising tides lifts all boats, right? So no, that's super interesting. I think Lindsey and I were both curious kind of about, from your day-to-day sort of operation of, are you mostly having conversations with the coaches? Obviously you're having to branch out throughout the organization, but it's super cool to hear that players are actually getting involved in this and like wanting to understand and use this information. Why do you think that is? Like, why do you think that that's sort of made a turn, even maybe in your experience over the last, decade that you've been in pro sports?
Makes me sad to think. I think it's just we're to a point now where so much information is publicly available. So many of these technologies have become affordable for these facilities to use. Right. So all these players during the offseason are going to facilities, back to their colleges to do their training. So they're getting exposed to all of this. It's like at a younger level. Right. So when they're coming up, they're used to getting information. So now they expect to have that information. I think that's like been the cool thing for me is when we're getting new guys from drafts across the last 4 teams I've been with, they're coming in expecting to see a certain level of data that they're going to get. Sure. Because that's what they got in college. That's what they got at their facility. That's what they've seen that all these different companies are putting out for these players. So they expect us to have that available. So they're ready to see it.
Yeah. They're walking in their sliders and saying, all right, marker me up. Let's go.
Yeah. But like, where's your, I don't know, one piece of technology that this one had?
Yeah. I think that's like a really cool part is like, again, across my orders, like when we trade for a player and they come in and like, all right, I'm used to getting this. I'm like, well, we don't have that, but we have this. Right.
Okay.
We can measure it a different way, but do it this. So I think that's been like a really cool side because they're just all so used to the information that's out there and so much is publicly available now that everyone on Twitter and LinkedIn are writing their own reports based on each guy. So they're used to seeing all of this data available. So now they want to take ownership of it. What I tell all my athletes is anything that we collect data-wise is your data. You're letting us collect it. So at any point if you want to see it, it's always yours. So I think that's like the relationship is the players owning what they're doing and owning their information so that then they're bought more into that. So,
yeah. Well, you kind of brought up earlier too that at first maybe there is the resistance because it somewhat seems like it's going to be used against them, right? To prevent them from from continuing that no-hitter, right? Or from, achieving that next level or getting that starting position or something because, the staff is going to then look at the biomechanics and be like, this guy's got, faster bat speed or something. I don't know what, what you're looking at, but now it sounds like they're like you said, just owning it and trying to figure out ways that they can then use that to their advantage.
And I think that leads into the relationship side. Like, when the players understand that we're not collecting this data to use against them, we're collecting it to help them, they're bought more into it, right? So we're not sitting there saying, hey, because of this number, like you're getting sent down. It's, hey, let's work on this. Let's get to the next spot so that you can be more consistent. So we're getting to that point now where it's more about the ownership of the relationship. So the players know that I'm not here to say whether you're good or bad. I'm here to make you better. I'm here to help you stay on the field. And that's like the relationship, that side that's so important, so that the athletes see you as someone that's there to help them and not someone that's to tell them whether they're good or bad.
Right. And I guess that's the importance of developing a relationship with each player and kind of know how to talk to them. So you're not just like some scary guy in the corner telling his coach all of his numbers.
Yeah. And I think you'll, if you ever like are at a home game or you see me at a practice, it's a lot different. So I'm not out in slacks and a polo with my iPad measuring stuff. I'm out there in our day's clothes. I'm wearing shorts, I'm wearing joggers and a t-shirt or a sweatshirt. Like we're out there having a casual conversation and then talking about the data. I'm not in the background just staring at iPad looking at them like, hey. Yeah. I'm talking to them about what we're seeing. We're having a conversation. So they know who I am. They know what I do when I go home. They know what my wife's name is. They know all this extra information because we built a relationship around it first so that they trust me as a person and then they can trust me as a biomechanist.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you've been gracious enough to allow us to visit the facility once or twice. And, you're dressed like a coach, right? Like, I mean, you fit right in. You're not, wearing a lab coat in the corner or something like that.
Yeah. I think that was something that was really eye-opening for me is like in the academic setting, when we collect data, we expect to look professional. So I'd go in my golf pants and a polo and I'd be marking people up. And I'd look like a professional. I'd look like a professor or a lab assistant.
Right.
And then getting to this side, it's like, those guys don't want to see that. They want to see someone who's around them, who understands what's happening every day, and they can talk to them about what they see. So we're not there to test them. We're there to help them. And the tester is getting that next spot. I'm not collecting research to publish and say, hey, this is what we need to do. I'm collecting research to keep them on the field and make them perform better. Like there's no personal agenda in this applied side that I have to publish.
Right.
Every team I've been with does not care if I publish a single paper. So it's not here to collect data to it's to process it. It's to collect data to help them. And I think that's really important for them to see and understand.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the key word right there, applied. So kind of, I guess, playing off that, how do these technologies, how do they actually get incorporated on a day-to-day basis? Like, is this constant measurement? I mean, you had even mentioned, and I think most of our listeners probably know that there's the in-game technology now too. So is it just omnipresent? Like, or is there ever a break? Are guys ever just, not being measured?
I would say like in games now, especially at the big league level, everything is getting measured.
Sure.
We've seen those advancements over the years. There's companies that the MLB has worked with that have put them in every stadium. There's companies that teams work with individually to put their own systems in, but we're constantly getting in-game data. That's just, no matter where you're at in the big leagues, there's data coming through.
That's just the new frontier too.
Yeah. I would say like, depending on the team, depends on how much technology is being used and how it's being used.
Sure.
I'm a big proponent of anything that we're going to do, we're going to test out for ourselves first before we roll it out to an athlete. So anytime we do it, we have a small subset of either players or staff that I trust that still have skill to do those movements. And we test it out on them to understand how it works. So we have a really long vetting process that we're not buying technology just to buy it because it's the new and latest, greatest thing. We're getting a demo, we're understanding where it's at, we're doing a trial period, whatever it may be, to test it out so that when we roll it out to an athlete, we know exactly what we're trying to do with it.
Right.
We're not a department with enough people that we can just buy everything, collect all this data, and then one day be like, oh, let's look at that.
We have to be see what
specific.
sticks.
We're very specific on how we do it. So one of the cool things about my job is any new tech company in baseball will send me an email. They'll send me a message on LinkedIn like, hey, check this out. So a lot of my time is spent vetting these companies and talking to these companies to understand what they have, what they're trying to bring to the table, and if that fits where we're at as a department, where we're trying to grow. Because like there are some things that I'm really interested in that we're just not ready for as an organization. That's been across all of my teams. So it's about building it in the right steps so that things, when you get them, you're ready for them as a team. You're ready. You know how to use them. You have a report ready. Everything's good. And it's not, hey, let's collect data for a year and then let's look at it 2 years down the road and like, oh, we missed something.
Right. I think that's really important, though, as a scientist, to know what technology is out there so that I mean, you're constantly having these conversations, even though maybe you don't have the funds to always buy something new every season. But
Yeah.
I mean, knowing what's out there, knowing how much the technology has changed in the past couple of years, I mean, it sounds like a pretty important part of your job, even if it's like, even if you aren't adding new technologies every single season.
Yeah. I think, I mean, if you saw my email, like there's a folder of all the different tech companies, and then I have a separate folder on my laptop that has any information they've ever sent me. So anytime there's an update. So every tech company that I've ever talked to understands if there's an update, I want to know about it.
Yeah.
I don't care if it's big or small, I want the update. So that way I can keep track. So when we say, hey, we're ready to do X, then I say, all right, these are our 6 companies. We'll talk to them again, say, hey, this is what we're trying to do. We'll figure out which one's the best at what we're trying to get. So I think one of the really important parts about someone in my position is keeping things very organized so that we can say, hey, we're talking about doing X next season. These are the companies that we've already talked to. We know they're there. We'll do a deep dive to see if there's any we've missed, and then we can vet out the one that's best for us.
Yeah, I bet that's that probably takes up a considerable amount of time, even just researching a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, right.
And especially with the rate that you know, a lot of these technologies are coming out.
Yeah.
When we're talking about baseball, even
Seems like
too.
every day there's a new company that's
new.
huge now.
Yeah, that's why I asked the question. I'm like, oh, this must be a very big part of your job.
Yeah. And I think something I thought where I was getting away from on getting into the applied side was reading a lot of research papers, but that is not the case. I think I read
Yeah,
more
no, not
now
at all.
than I did when I was in academics, because in academics you're worried about such a small set of data. You're worried about, hey, this is what I'm researching, so this is all I'm reading about. Whereas now there's a huge broad scope of anything that comes out in baseball. It's like, well, I got to read that paper. Oh, I got to read that one. So I think that was like a shock to me, is getting into this. This is probably dumb on my part, but I should have understood getting into this that it's not just about understanding like, oh, what papers have looked at X and hitting. It's okay, what if all of these hitting papers looked at, and are there any things that we can pull from it?
Right. Yeah. I mean, you're trying to gain that edge, right? And, you know, it could literally be hiding in some paper that was published in Frontiers Open Access or something, right?
Yeah.
That you never would know. But
Maybe it's one paper looked at this one parameter that's maybe unique to other papers or something.
yeah. And probably within your experience at this point, too, you can kind of give those the eye test. Be like, you know, this seemed like this was a pretty good setup, good experiment, and the results are showing promising things. Let's see if we can replicate.
Yeah, I think that's probably, I'm going to go off on a little tangent, but I think that's probably the coolest thing about now the data being publicly accessible is so many more people are looking at this information, looking at it in new and interesting ways, that when things come out, it's like, oh, I never thought about looking at it that way.
Yeah.
Oh, let's talk about this as a group, see if this is something we can do and something that makes sense. So like, that's probably like a really cool part about this. And sometimes it can get on my nerves that I see so many people talking about X player on whatever team I'm working for and why they are doing certain things, like, oh, this will be their fix. But it's really cool to see how people are looking at this in new and interesting ways.
So that in-game data is publicly available?
Some of it is, yeah.
Wow.
Interesting.
I had no idea.
Where can we find this publicly available data?
It should be on...
I mean, I'm guessing you may have to have like an account or something. Like,
Yeah.
I will let you know. But
Okay.
I know there's a bunch of it, like the bat path data and stuff that is publicly accessible
Okay.
this past season.
Yeah.
Very cool.
That's cool.
Yeah, so now you have anyone, whether they work in baseball or not, can have access to this information and comment on it, whether that's good or not, I guess.
And there's specific databases now that companies have put together that have just a huge amount of baseball hitting or pitching data built in biomechanics. Right. So now anyone can go in and pull information from that and look at the same data set in different ways too. So
Right.
there's a lot of ways for people looking to get into baseball biomechanics to find publicly accessible data now.
Right. Can they figure that one, you know, golden nugget out? And, you know, you put that feather in their cap and bring that to the organizations.
Yeah, and I talked about this in other situations, but I mean, there are pieces of technology that all 30 teams in the league have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you had a bird's eye view of all the teams, you'd see each of us using it slightly differently because each of us are trying to find that competitive advantage.
Sure.
Yeah.
There are technologies that I've used across all 4 teams, and each time we're using it slightly different across all 4 teams because they found something new. And I think that's probably the coolest thing is it's not just about what technology you have. It's about like how you're actually using it and what you're getting out of it. Like what's that competitive advantage that you found as an organization?
Right. Well,
Yeah.
again, I think coming back to that key word of applied, right?
Yeah.
Like the data is the data. It's there. It's, can you figure out that way to apply it to the individual?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it's kind of coupled with everything that we've talked about up to this point with the communication lines and, that full team approach. And really that's where that competitive edge seems like it's going to come from, versus just being like, hey, we need a faster rotation of the torso or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, those things probably help, but it's like, how are you communicating it? What's the drills that are being used to actually achieve those results? Like there's this whole, it's a big puzzle that you got to kind of find all the pieces to.
Well, and just being adaptable to it as well, because you said a lot of these teams all have the same technology. They're all using it in different ways. Like, it's probably not really in your best interest to say like, all right, the one golden thing that I'm always going to look at is improving torso rotation. Right. If you had your one guy where that's all he talked about, I'm sure that won't go very far because you have to be adaptable to learning more. It's like, okay, we fixed the torso rotation, but now what about this other thing? Now what about ball speed? Now what's affecting that?
Yep.
So like in biomechanics, it's just so challenging and variable that there isn't one thing that's always going to work for every single person.
Yeah, and I think it's important even to say like, hey, if we find the one thing that's wrong with them, just because X drill worked with X player, it doesn't mean it's going to work with this.
Sure.
Right? So like, we're not just trying to look at this entire data set to find the one thing that's going to help them, like low hanging fruit. We're also, once we find that low hanging fruit, figure out what we can do to help them fix it. It's not a one size fits all. This drill always works perfectly. It's, well, this drill worked for this guy, so let's try it. Oh, we didn't make the progress we thought we would. So what's next?
Right.
What's next?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's an onion.
Yeah,
you're just peeling layers. Yeah,
layers and layers.
What using these different technologies, even across organizations, like what's been the biggest challenge with actually implementing them into like a high performance setting?
Yeah, I mean. For better or for worse, players want data and they want it quick. They don't want to sit around for a long period of time waiting on stuff.
Right.
So what we found is things that can be applicable and applied very fast, so that they're not better or worse, say like in a lab setting, stripping down to their underwear, putting a bunch of markers on, something that's faster so that they can perform in their bullpen mount. Like they can do it in that side. So like that's been the most interesting thing for me is I don't necessarily look for 100% accuracy in technologies. I'm not looking for something to be perfect. I need something to be good enough that it's actionable and that it's quick.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, I mean, I have a paper that's published out there on some sensors that testing like the accuracy based on a motion capture system to the sensor, and there was a slight difference that was statistically significant. And in my practical applications, I still said you should use this sensor.
Sure.
Right. And that's where I had the most pushback is, well, if it's statistically different, how can you say this? It's like, if you find a delta and you understand that if you collect enough information that it gets close enough that you can make those assumptions, then it's good enough to use.
Yeah.
Right. Like,
yeah, with that understanding too, that, okay, yeah, this isn't at the absolute accuracy, but like you said, it puts you in a target range.
Right. And I think that's the thing that's hardest to understand going from the academic side to the applied side is I don't need 100%. I need 95.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I need something that's good enough that if we get enough data that we understand that there's a difference.
Yeah. In research, it's like almost 100% about specifications, but in the applied world, it's not always about that. It's like this player is not going to wait around for half an hour while I put markers everywhere. Yeah. Like it just has to be easier.
And if you look at research, like there are papers that publish that a 2-degree difference is statistically significant and that it should be adjusted. Like What coach have you ever met that I could say, hey, change that by 2 degrees? And
Yeah.
like, got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, got
We
it.
got you.
I'll do it.
So like there's that side too, that we're trying to fill in gaps that make the most sense and not saying like, hey, this 2 degree difference that we saw from game 1 to game 162, you're like, oh no, he's done.
He's done. That's
Yeah.
it.
So understanding
over.
where things can lie and what we can actually adjust. So like when we're talking about ranges and we're talking about things, like getting them into a good spot is more important than saying, hey, you have to be at X number, because trying to get them to be the perfect human with the perfect mechanics just, in my opinion, doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Like, everyone's independent and their mechanics are slightly different based on their anatomy, based on their muscle structure, based on all of their stability, mobility stuff. So everything is independent to what they're trying to do. Deception, right? Arm slot, where they're trying to get, how they make their pitches move. Everything is so independent that it's not like, hey, everyone needs a 3/4 arm slot to throw a fastball at 12 o'clock to get the most backspins.
Right.
Oh, this guy has more deception, so his slot's a little lower, so it's coming across, so it has more horizontal. Like, there's so much more that comes into play than trying to create the one mechanics that everyone should have.
Right.
And so that, I mean, you're kind of getting into some of the pitching stuff. So how, and, your specialty, let's say, at least from your research background, is in hitting. How do those analyses differ between the pitcher and the hitter? Because I think we even kind of touched on this early on, was like with a pitcher, the sort of situation or the scenario is very repeatable. They start with the ball in their hand, and it's like, most pitchers will have 3-4 pitches that they throw on a regular basis. And so you're chunking those out in a repeatable sort of a context. But the hitter is fully reacting to whatever the ball is going to be doing. So how does that play into how you analyze them? Do you just sort of take that reactionary part out of it, or is like, how do you quantify their ability to make those adjustments? And
That's an interesting
of course,
question, and
you
I'm
don't need to
very
give up the
interested.
secret sauce, right? You don't need to give up the secret sauce, but it's interesting, because I think that's, like you said, kind of where things are leading towards now, where there obviously is a lot to explore still pitching wise and what to do with that information. But now with the data that's being able to be grabbed from the hitting side, it's opening this other aspect.
Yeah. I can't go into specifics.
Sure, yeah.
You're out of that. But I think it is really cool to see how all this is happening. So, like, on the pitching side, it is more of a close chain, right? Like, we're doing the exact same thing over and over again, and we know what we're trying to do. Like, I'm trying to throw a fastball up in it. I'm trying to throw a fastball down and away. I want this slider to be right behind his back foot.
Right? And you can make that decision.
So that decision is made prior to what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
On the hitting side, because it is so reactionary, everything is so independent. So there's also the mental side of this, right? Like, hey, this pitcher, when he's in a 2-strike count and he's ahead, throws this 50% of the time, this 12, this 20, whatever it may be.
Sure.
So they're hunting a specific pitch. And like, what if it's not the pitch that you're expecting?
Yeah.
So there's so
Guess
much,
the wrong one.
there's so much that's still like in the air for hitting wise that it does get more convoluted to look at that.
Sure.
I won't go into specifics on how we try to break it down.
Yeah.
But I do think it's like super interesting. But on the pitching side, I think that's why we saw so much more research into baseball pitching to start, because we're trying to repeat mechanics. We want our mechanics to look as similar across every pitch, so that there's no tip before the ball is released for them to understand what's coming. So these guys are trying to create the most similar delivery they can across their 2 pitches for closer, their 3, their 4, their 5, some 6. They're trying to create the most repeatable mechanics across all of those pitches to look similar, so that they don't know what's coming to them until it's too late.
Interesting. Yeah, I guess from my perspective, I always thought that the dive into pitching was more injury related, just because of, Tommy John and like all of the prevalence of that throughout pitchers, especially like at the youth level.
Yeah.
But it sounds like it's actually more performance driven in terms of being able to have that control.
I think it's an actually really healthy balance.
Sure.
Because depending on how you break down the information, you can look at a lot of different things.
Yeah.
I think we've done a lot of work on the injury prevention side. I think that's where a lot of research has been. I think it's starting to push more towards the performance, and we're seeing things about fastball be low and that kind of stuff coming out. I mean, there was just a study that said if you throw harder, you're more at risk for TJ. So like all of this,
Okay.
all of this is coming, right? So trying to figure out where to balance it. And I think that's probably the thing I talked about the most when I'm talking to someone interested in this is we're not here just for performance. We're not here just to keep them from getting injured. There are guys that are getting injured whether we make adjustments or not. Some of that's anatomical, but there's so much at play. So we're trying to do a balancing act of keeping them healthy, but also keeping them performing. If I wanted every guy to be healthy, I'd have them all throw 80 miles an hour.
Yeah.
That's a good point. Yeah.
But then where would we be?
Right.
So it's about
You
that
wouldn't
balance.
be in baseball performance, right?
It's about that balance and trade-off is like, hey, this guy might throw 95, 96, 97, and there might be something as mechanics that you're like, we're on a fringe. But if you're looking at it, it's like, as long as they stay consistent, as long as we don't see any detriments, as long as we see all this happening, then we're okay. So it's about that balancing act of getting them to a good spot, but also not taking away what makes them elite.
For that purpose, do you find that like the trends are more important versus like the discrete data that you're getting on a day-to-day basis?
I wouldn't put more weight into one or the other. I think there are specific ways to use each of the information to benefit. Right? It's like, it's not just, hey, we only look at the full signal, full wave. It's not, we just look at the discrete time points. Like there's a mix of all of that that's really important to get it done.
Mm. But I guess like over time, right? Like you might see things happening that are, you've probably trained yourself and probably even built algorithms out to make those detections to like flag and be like, okay, like this is something that we need to start looking into. And then you kind of dive into maybe that discrete data for that day. Is that a true statement?
No comment.
No comment.
No
I
comment.
think
That seems general.
I think you're right. I think a lot of this is finding the trends, understanding what makes each player tick, where they're going. Like I said, like baseball is long. We have 162 games. So there's stuff that's going to change throughout the season. That's a regular fatigue, wear and tear. And there's stuff that's like, oh, this is leading towards an injury. So understanding what's what is really important.
Yeah.
Yeah, and because it's so individual, I mean, man, I just keep on going back to how much time must it take to define what this guy's baseline looks like at the beginning of the season versus like, okay, is this normal fatigue where like, you know, he's going to be okay if he keeps doing this, or is this like, oh shit, you know?
And I think that's probably the cool part is like we're constantly trying to find that for each. Across all of the workers I've been with, it's slightly different, but it doesn't mean any of them are wrong. Like we're just doing it a slightly different way to get to the same spot that we think we're helping our athletes the most.
Yeah.
Do you use kind of, you know, confirmation bias at all in your initial analysis to say like, okay, I analyzed this and then this is what ended up happening, whether like the guy hurt himself or what, or did better or whatever, and then use that information you got as an indicator later on?
I mean, I hope that I don't have anyone get injured ever. But yeah, like understanding what we've seen and what trends are happening with specific injuries. Like I think that's really important to understand where guys are. I think one of the interesting things is you said like creating a baseline, and like something that people generally don't think about is when the off season hits, a lot of these guys go work out at their own facility. They're making their own adjustments. So when they come back to spring training and the mechanics have changed, like we're starting from scratch again to build a new baseline.
A guy comes, he's gained 15 pounds of muscle, and you're like, okay, well now we gotta totally readjust, you know, what's going on.
Right. So like there's a whole curve again coming back into spring training for a lot of these teams to understand where the guys are, what they've been working on. And I think we are lucky that we have good relations with our players, so we understand what's happening in the off season. But like as they come back, as things have changed, like they went home and they hunted for 2 months, and they come back and their wife had a baby, and they were also trying to work out. It's like there's extra stresses that just happen in all parts of these lives, all their lives, that are just really important for us to understand what could be happening. Right. So say a player mid-season goes on his paternity leave and they have a baby, and then Their wife and their kid are living with them, and they're not getting much sleep, and we're seeing these detriments in the game. Like it's most likely not anything to do with their performance and how hard they're
Yeah,
trying, what they're
exactly.
doing in the weight room. But like
Yeah.
they're just not getting as much sleep as they were. So there's
Right.
all of these different aspects that come in on the mental side too. That are really
Mhm.
important to understand for us in the biomechanics side.
The human side, right? It's
Yeah.
like, at the end of the day, that's what they are. They're still just regular people that,
I mean, if you look at the research, we've proved for 15, 20 years that using a weighted implement on the on deck circle doesn't actually help. It actually decreases bat velocity.
wow.
Every guy still does it because mentally it feels better, right?
Wow.
Interesting.
So there's this whole side of all sports that we have to understand the mental side of it too. It's like for time and time again, we've proven that it doesn't help,
Yeah.
but yet every guy still does it when they're waiting on deck.
Babe Ruth swinging 3 bats in the
Yep.
circle, right?
Yeah, it's all superstition too. I mean, that's a huge part of baseball as well,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah, that's super interesting. And I mean, that side of performance, I don't know. I'm actually curious. Like, do you guys also get in touch with that too? I mean, you're obviously from a biomechanist, so you're looking at movement capacity, movement performance. How does then the other side, the physiological side, the mental side, do you guys take that into account, or is that just, another department and you guys are kind of working with them here and there type of a thing?
As much as we can.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's important to note, like with any of these situations, when guys are talking to anyone or mental health, like that's all very personal.
Sure.
So none of that is ever shared with any of us on that
Right.
side. But understanding like the small things, like, hey, how did you sleep last night? Like, oh, not great. Oh, cool. Now understand.
Yeah.
Like, hey, how's the baby doing? Like, oh, how's your puppy? Right?
Mhm.
Like understanding what's happening in their lives really helps us on that side. And again, I think that's the coolest thing about like our profession is we are like a large organization, but we're so small and like a tight knit family with all of our players that we understand what's happening in their personal lives. So it really helps us understand what's going on.
So in your report, you flag it and you're like, puppy did not sleep well.
Yeah.
And like, I'm going to go off on another little tangent here, but we talked earlier about how certain players can handle information, certain players can't.
Mhm.
Understanding their mental side of that.
Sure.
So I talk to players a lot about like tracking their sleep and readiness scores and all kinds of different things. And you have to understand as a player what you can and can't take care of. Because
Right.
if you
Right.
choose to use something that tells you your readiness in the morning and you're a starting pitcher and it says 15, is that going to bother
Yeah,
you?
exactly. Yeah.
Right.
So understanding where you're at and how the technologies that you're using can help them,
Mhm.
it comes in the same way. It's like, hey, if I didn't get much sleep last night, is that in my head that I'm not going to perform well? Or is it just like, oh, I didn't sleep last night, whatever, I'm going to still go out there and do what I can do.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, because I mean, I don't necessarily know if this is how it is in baseball, but you've heard in other professional sports organizations, yeah, they're team issuing, these wearables for guys to take and have at home, and it's just constant monitoring essentially. And we even had a conversation with one of our other guests previously, how that can be detrimental, to these elite level athletes because of that exact thing that you mentioned. It's like they wake up and they're like, oh man, this thing's telling me I had a bad night, and so now I'm gonna have a bad day, and
Yeah.
they just make that decision. Yeah, that's that part. I find it interesting to see that crossover right between the sort of physiological performance and the and mental performance, of course, plays a big role in there too, into the biomechanical performance. So just curious, like how you guys bridge that within the organizations, and if that's a big thing in baseball.
Yeah,
Here
I
as
think,
well.
I think it's another growing spot.
Sure.
I've seen it grow tremendously since I got into the game.
Yeah.
And I think as things can be applied across, I think that's where they are. And I think we do a really good job of making sure we're being responsible for our athletes
Mm-hmm.
in terms of their privacy, but also doing what we can in all the other aspects to get them what they need.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
The I guess with that, I mean, we've kind of talked about these sort of trends in your time in pro sports and what you've seen and what's on the horizon. Like, is there anything that's like super exciting to you that you're eager for? I mean, you mentioned earlier there's probably every organization you've kind of had these like ideas for projects that maybe you weren't ready for.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, like, is there anything big that's kind of on the horizon for baseball performance?
I mean, from my end, I think the most exciting thing is just the growth.
Sure.
Right? You're seeing teams hire for the first time in these positions and seeing things really grow. Obviously, I want the competitive advantage, so I'm really happy with where I'm at and what we're doing. But it's really exciting to see the growth of this area of the sport and teams buying in and understanding where they can actually help out.
Yeah.
I think that's probably been like the coolest thing is seeing each of these teams, seeing people I know, seeing people that like I've talked to that have reached out to try to get into the sport, seeing them get jobs and seeing them to learn the path. I think that's probably the coolest thing for me. There's a lot of technology going across, people being acquired by different companies. So I think it's going to be really cool to see like where that leads us as a league.
Right.
And not necessarily the teams driving things, but seeing how the league tries to drive this because it is an initiative that it seems that is going. So
Yeah.
we'll see how it works.
Yeah, definitely. On one hand too, it's cool to see how they're going to incorporate it from the fan side as well. Because I think that's another area that even just having this open access data, any person who there's, these kind of statistical wizards out there that have no formal education or formal skill building, but that, are great with that information and they're going out and skinning these things together and creating social media graphics and, building essentially livelihoods on turning this stuff into exciting information. And then you've got the league, with all this in-game stuff, being able to turn that into graphics on the broadcasts and, these breakdowns during the after shows and all of that stuff. And so it's been cool, I think, from the industry standpoint to sort of see how they're starting to communicate biomechanics and biomechanical data to the masses.
Yeah.
You see it with like the entertainment side that you talked about. So seeing the actual like tracking of the players,
Right.
I mean, even thinking about the NFL, like when you have the Simpsons game or you had the SpongeBob game, like the tracking of everything.
Yeah.
like,
That's true. Yeah. That's all
still
the same.
part of
Yeah.
biomechanics. Like you're tracking how the player's moving,
Yeah.
you're tracking their speed. All of that still is coming from a system that can track biomechanical data. Right. So all of this coming to an entertainment side is also very exciting because it just means that we're going to continue to grow.
Yeah. It just means that it's going to continue to become more and more accessible, which I think is a good thing. Then people learn everyone's speaking the same language at that point if everyone knows it.
Yeah. Are those visualizations that you guys are trying to produce and be like, okay, we got to make these so that they could be put on a broadcast, but they can also, be communicated to our coaches?
That has nothing to do with us. Thank goodness. But no, I think that's showing like these leagues are buying into these systems. They can start to track that kind of stuff. And I think it's showing that like the league is seeing value in trying to get that information because there's not just a team vested interest in this data. Like there's entertainment purposes that this can really make it really cool for the casual viewer.
Right.
Yeah. And
great.
that's kind of half of it, right? It's not just about, it is about the players, but it's also about, these teams make money based on viewership and people enjoying what they're seeing. So
this is a business. So at the end of the day, we have to make money. At the end of the day, the owner and the team has to make money so you can put a team on the field. Right? If you're constantly losing money, how are you going to pay a player? So there's that side where you have to get butts and seats. You have to have that entertainment value so people want to watch on TV. Like thinking about like my friends back home, like they're not super interested in baseball. Like they're not going to sit down and watch a game on TV. But or like someone who doesn't watch football, but they sat down to watch the SpongeBob broadcast, and it's different. It's like these entertainment things are really coming up, and it's using biomechanical technology to create this new side. It's just like thinking about when you're looking at the creation of a 2K video game and you see them in the lab there on the court, right, with their markered suit on. Like all of this is coming from the biomechanics side, so it's really, really cool to see.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun seeing that the sharing between those two industries. Something that we talk about from time to time as well. And honestly, how we have to describe a lot of the times what we do for work.
We talk about this all the time. It's like, what do you say when someone asks you what you do and what your company does? And it's like,
video game development. Like default, like that's the
Yeah.
easiest one. But now we can also say, like these sports podcasts and things, just to at least
Yeah.
put the barriers, right? Obviously, that's not what we do specifically here
No.
in Axon, but
just describing biomechanics, like when I try to describe motion capture, I'm like, have you ever seen like when you're watching a making of a movie that has visual effects and you see all those ping pong balls
Yeah.
on top of people? That's motion capture.
yeah,
I always do did you ever see Sports Science on ESPN? That's
Yes.
what I do.
Okay.
that's I go to that too. I was actually on that show, like
Wait, really?
like 3 or
What?
4 times. Yeah.
When?
I don't know. I guess it was probably 2015, 2016.
That's funny.
Excuse me, what? I didn't know that.
Yeah. We did a couple different episodes, looking at reaction timing, looking at muscle activation patterns. So, yeah, it was
That's
fun.
really
Yeah,
cool.
John
That's
Brinkus.
cool.
Shout out John Brinkus. I don't know where he's at these days, but yeah, it was fun. It was a cool experience. That was like, I was early in my career. And I was like, this is it. Like,
It's like, this is it.
I made it. So, yeah, I wish that show was still around. I mean, even from before, it was, watching it as a viewer,
Yeah.
as a kid, or, teenager or whatever age I was. It was that definitely like broke down, that this exists, and you're like, whoa, like, okay, this guy he can punch as hard as an elephant can stomp or whatever.
Right.
That was always the funny thing, was like having to try and convert the results that we got into these like goofy parameters.
Yeah.
But it made sense because like you can't just tell somebody that they have this reaction time, like that. There's no context to it.
They have the reaction time of a jaguar.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there was ones that I was like the average guy. So like I would collect data on myself doing the thing, and then be compared to the athlete.
So
It was so
cool.
funny.
I need to find this now.
Yeah.
Is it out there? on
Yeah,
the
we'll
internet?
put some links up for you guys.
Yeah.
In
we
the
need that.
show.
I think it's hilarious that Ethan's like, yeah, I tell people that, Sports Science on ESPN, that's kind of like what I do, but I was never on there. And Zach's like, actually, I want some.
Actually,
Yeah.
I was on that show.
Yes.
I was the average person.
Now I guess you're going to feel like you can't say that anymore.
Yeah. No, I would find a new reference now.
No, you can just say I knew a guy.
I knew a guy who was on
I
Sports
know a
Science.
guy.
I know a
Yeah.
guy who was on ESPN Sports Science, and its variations. I think it was on Fox Sports at one point, and then it got UFC bought it. So I've been around in the sports science production side of things.
That's awesome.
Um,
Man, you learn something new every day.
Hey,
I thought
yeah.
I knew you.
yeah, no, I know. Turns out check my IMDb out. No, I'm kidding. No, it's not on there. No credits. I think
We'll make one. For
yeah,
you.
exactly. Yeah, there you go.
I'll go back and I'll do it.
Yeah.
Something you've talked about is like people getting involved in this. And so I think that's always helpful for us to always include in the podcast with our guests and people who have this high level of experience and are, really pushing the envelope, is like, how does somebody get to where you are? What are what's a piece of advice that you'd like to give maybe a listener who's just trying to get across that bridge?
Yeah. I think it's be open to all opportunities, right?
Yeah.
It's like my career started as an intern for 2 summers working in Port Charlotte, Florida for the extended and GCL race. Right? Like getting a foot in the door in baseball is probably one of the hardest things to do.
Yeah.
So being open to anything that could be. And like my piece of advice for anyone that's ever interviewing is like, be curious, ask questions. Like, I don't want someone who's going to come in and just be like, oh yeah, like it makes sense. That's why we do it that way. It's
Right.
like, I want someone to come in and challenge me. Like,
Mhm.
hey, what if we looked at it this way? Great. Let's look at it that way. Let's see if it gives us the extra advantage. So for me, it's be open to any opportunities and then be curious about everything. Ask questions. Just really dive into something and be interested in it. And like when you are interested and you're truly interested in a topic, we can tell.
Mhm.
So ask those questions, be curious, just be ready to really take whatever opportunity can come your way.
I love that. I think that's a great way for us to wrap this up. I guess going forward, how can listeners follow along with maybe some of the stuff you guys are doing? Obviously, watch the MLB. That's a big
Yeah,
one.
watching the athletics.
You got any presence on the social media or anything you want to shout out?
Yeah, so probably the one that has the most like Kentucky sports and an occasional retweet of the athletics is my Twitter.
Okay.
Ethan Stewart 14. If anyone's interested in learning more about biomechanics or talking to me specifically, you can always reach out to me on LinkedIn. You can find me there, send me a message. I check it like, I don't know, once every 2 months or something. But when I check it,
It will be there. Yeah.
when I check it, you will get a response. I love talking to people that are interested in this, helping them try to find their path, interested in figuring out what they want to go to school, whatever they want to do. So anybody who's interested in this, just always reach out. LinkedIn is probably the best to reach out for that. If you wanted to see random Kentucky tweets and the occasional like retweet of the athletics account,
Yep.
follow me on Twitter.
Awesome.
Nice. Well, you heard it here. That's where you find him.
That's right. Well, thank you so much, sir. It was a pleasure. We had a lot of fun. I think, being that you're local, hopefully we can set it up again here in the future.
Yeah.
Until then, best of luck getting rolling here on spring training, just around the corner.
Yeah.
And to everybody else, make sure you're subscribing to the podcast. Follow us on at Nerax on USA on all of the social media accounts. And we'll see you next time.
Good.
Bye.
Bye.